Okay, so we're going to do something different here with these next couple of sessions and hopefully super interactive. You've heard me talk a lot today, and I'm going to kind of prime the pump here, but we want this to really be like a training session, both this and the later session that we have going on in another hour. This one is supposed to be focused on FileSets and kind of some best practices around FileSets. And we're definitely going to start in that arena. But what we'd love is for you, I'm going to prime the pump here a little bit with the kind of old school hand pump. We're going to pour some water in and we're going to get it going because we're going to talk about a couple things related to FileSets with VPP that I just want to make sure, just kind of tips and tricks kind of stuff to make sure everybody's aware of. Emma's going to work with me here as well. And we're hoping, though, that what we're going to get is a dynamic-driven content of this, of just, we'd love it if you'd say, how do I this or how do I that? And we'd even love it more if folks wanted to crowdsource the answers to those things, because it doesn't necessarily need to be me or Emma or anybody else. If you know the answer, maybe we can go that route. Let's see how it works. But we're going to start. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to talk about payloads and file sets a little bit. And I guess I'm going to show you something in the web admin first in case you haven't seen it. And then we're going to hop in to native here as well. So let me share my screen. I guess we'll start there. All right, so we're in native, and let me go ahead and bring up a web admin that we can take a look at real quick. There's a couple things I'd like to show you with relation to payloads. Can everybody see and hear me okay? Well, not see me exactly, but my screen.
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, super, great. All right, so let's talk a little bit about payloads with regard to the web admin. Now, right now, the only content that you can drive from here are the VPP payloads and profiles. But the other payloads are coming, other types. We're working on MSIs and PKGs now, except we don't know exactly when those are going to release, where you can start to build payloads here. But you can assign payloads, what you would in the native admin call an association. Here in the web admin, we call a deployment. Now, once you start doing a deployment, you can't edit it in the associations view in native anymore. But I wanted to at least show you the concept, a couple of concepts that we have over here, so that you know kind of what's coming, because it may give you some thought about how you're deploying things. So in this deployments view, I'm going to go ahead and create a new deployment, right? And we're seeing this kind of structure a lot. So this will actually be a record in here. So I'm going to call this, just my test deployment or whatever. And in particular, it was this targets tab that I wanted to talk about, because there's a new feature in here that I think is pretty useful. So you're probably used to targeting groups or device. I can go through and I can select an individual device here, right? I can go in. It's, I'm not actually deploying anything, but I'll just pick this device and we'll apply that. So that one's in my deployment, and I can pick groups, right? And this is the same thing we can do with associations. So I can say all Mac OS, for instance, and apply that. So there's a resultant set of devices that I'll see when I look at the summary. It tells me, okay, there's 6 devices in groups, 7 overall devices, 1 standalone and these others, and this is how they're assigned. But if we go back to targets, we'll see that we've got this new concept down at the bottom. This is a feature request from a long time ago, which is the ability to add exclusions, right? Especially with this type of group, when you do an all Mac OS type of thing, is to be able to do an exclusion. So we can do exclusions in 2 ways. You can say by group or by device. What that allows us to do is eliminate devices from this assignment. So if we go back here, and remember it was 6 devices, I think, here, and this additional 1 individually. If we select the device, say from that same group, and say this FileWave Mac, we're going to exclude from this deployment. We get the little red X on it here. When we look at the summary, what you'll see now is there are now only 5 devices that are in groups that are being assigned, and this device is explicitly excluded from getting this content. So this is, I think, going to help with some deployments. And of course, that can be a smart group too. So you could say, if we go back to the example that we did earlier, remember we did our production and our patch group, right? Or we kind of built the smart group to say, hey, it's all Mac OS, but it's not, or it's all Windows in that case, but it's not patch testing. We could do that here by selecting the group. In fact, we could do the exact thing. If we went here, we would see, if I remove this and select instead that group that we created before, which was called, what was it, production, I think it was. Yeah, and test distribution, our production windows, right, could be the group that we're targeting, to use our earlier example. And the exclusion could be a group, and that group would be our patch group, which was also in test distro there. All right, so we can do that and even take this exclusion away. And that's going to do the same thing that we had before, right? So it's 4 devices because there was the 1 device that we're excluding, okay? So just a concept to throw out there. And sorry, there's a question on that?
No, it's more of just a suggestion about custom fields and smart groups.
Yeah. Okay, great, because that's exactly the kind of thing that we're looking for out of this. And I'm going to take the reins off here in a second and let you all start to do some things. But let's switch out of the web admin for a second, because I just wanted to lay that foundation that there's a possibility there with doing some very creative things in the web admin. But we're going to hop back into native, and there are 2 things with VPP that I'd really like to cover that sometimes people don't know about. One is a very basic thing, but sometimes gets missed because it's so kind of hidden in preferences for VPP. If we're looking at VPP file sets, which of course are the things that are coming from Apple in this regard, and we look at configuring the tokens, hey, I typed that right, and we look at the detail of a token, in this view, you can choose for this VPP token where the file sets that are created go. So if you go and buy new VPP apps, and there's a checkbox, by the way, in the web admin that allows you to say, hey, go ahead and just automatically create everything. But when those get created, you can choose where they go. And sometimes folks don't know that. So in my case, I've got this VPP token set to create all VPP apps in this OS iOS location. Now, that may not be accurate because I may have macOS apps coming from VPP as well. So maybe I don't want it here. Maybe I want to put it in a holding place. So we just want to point that out, that you can control where those go instead of them always going to root, right? So you may not have it configured, and so what you might find is when you look in file sets, although this thing is a mess because I'm doing all sorts of testing in here. You may find that your apps get created here at root, but you can control that. Okay. And there's one more additional new thing that when Zim and I talked about this yesterday, we thought, folks would really like to see or should know about if they don't, has to do with license reservations. How many people hate those? I'm just curious. I'm guessing a fair number of people find the reservations a little bit annoying. So we made a change here recently in 14. Oh, look at all those me's. Yes, hate license reservations. Yeah, because they added a level of administration that we didn't need, right? You can remove these now. So what you'll see is there's a little change in here. Whereas before you always had to have a number of licenses reserved. So in this case, 12. If I bought more, it wouldn't necessarily increase this. It was going to stay at 12 forever. But I can turn that off now, right? And say, okay. And you're going to notice that when I go back into that now, it shows that we see this option here about the dynamic quota, right? So there is no set reservation here. The question on changing it globally, boy, I don't remember. Let's see if we can change it. I don't think so. No, I don't think that we can. Do I have my preferences open? I do. No, there's no setting for that, but that's a really good question about changing that. But by default, anything new that you buy will come in without a reservation set. It's only pre-existing ones that are problematic for fixing. So what this means, though, what that change means for that to turn it so that there is no reserve held on a particular file set means that if I buy more of these, those more are automatically allocated. So say I own 10,000 already and I bought 2,000 more, I don't have to do anything in FileWave for that. It's automatically going to pick up the additional 2,000 and I don't have to keep managing that particular file set. It's just going to pick them up. Okay. All right, so have we primed the pump enough? Does anybody have anything that you'd like to, hey, how do I this, or hey, how do I that? Because we can definitely do that, or we can stay on the path that we're on. And
there was a question about the exclusions being available in the native admin client as well. If you plan on putting that in there.
It's unlikely that that will be the case. We're trying as much as possible to, as we're moving. So there's a long list of things in FileWave that we're moving over to the web admin, of course, as we kind of make this migration. What we're trying to do is as we move them, we're improving them, but not touching the native code as much as possible, unless it's something that we have to do there. So we're trying to rethink things as we move them to the web admin and make them just ever so much better. And it's also a place where we're picking up a lot of things from our enhancements backlog. So I can say, I can't say when it's going to be released, but I can talk that we're working on it right now. The development's happening. For a long time, we've had requests about, hey, can't we schedule a time when something like a Windows update can install, a software update can install, so that it's not just starting from this point, but actually between the hours of, say, 6 and 10 at night or stuff like that. That's being worked on right now. But that's being done in the web admin. So as we're working on improving these things, those functionalities are moving into the web admin at the same time.
And there's also a question about best practices for moving Catalina devices to Big Sur.
Best practice, well, do you want to talk about that one,
Emma? Well, well, personally, I haven't had any experience with the file set moving from Catalina to Big Sur. I've just previously done like the Mojave to Catalina, but I don't believe anything else has changed.
Well, let's talk about crowdsourcing that a little bit here, because that's the thing that I'm finding. I don't know about all of you, but the thing that I'm finding that I'm really enjoying today is how much everybody's talking to each other. Is there anybody on that would like to talk about your experience moving from Catalina to Big Sur with FileWave helping in that process? Feel free to chime in if you do. How many of you have actually made that move, or are you trying to avoid it? Yeah, I think that I don't find that a huge surprise, because you know, with the way everybody's working in the environments right now with devices distributed, it's kind of risky, right, to think about a major upgrade. Anybody have anything they'd like to mention on that one? All right, so it sounds like not a lot of feedback from the field on that. I don't know that I have anything except go slowly on that topic. Is you know, it's never a race. Of course, as we move forward with the MDM restrictions, you have to make sure that you've got all the notifications and everything in place for all the apps that you're using, and that you've got the TCC profiles in place, right? And Emma, you could probably talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about that issue you worked on earlier this week that was specific here with the TCC profiles and the order of installation and that.
Yeah, so I was working with a customer on installing a file set that needed not only just like system extensions, but also accessibility features and, you know, the ability to give notifications without actually prompting the user. And the issue that he was running into was when he was pushing it out, the profiles weren't being installed before the application was. So when the application was installed, the user was still getting prompted for to allow the extension to kick off to run, and the issue was resolved by just making sure that those profiles were installed first.
Yeah,
so
PM,
to actually allow the extension before.
PM, you had something?
Yes, the way we do it is that we have a pre-requirement script looking for the profile. So we install the profile separately, and then we have a pre-requirement checking for the profile so that it's installed before the application is installed.
Yeah, that's a good safety check. Are you just doing the profiles command to read that?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good
usually the best deployment is for the everything that needs to be cleared for the system extensions, or kernel extensions as they were called before. So we have a really big profile being installed at start, and all applications needing to have extensions deployed need to check for that profile first.
Practically, how do you find that impacts?
And that's
the
also
speed?
a really good way to find all those pesky non-user approved MDMs. Those people who have got to approve the MDM profile, because they don't get the VPN client, for instance, and then they call support.
Yeah, there's an inventory item for that too, although it may require that it's user approved to read it. So what do you find? What do you find the timing? Is the timing impacted at all with your delivery with having that pre-check?
Yeah, so even though we have tried to have the profile as a dependency first in line, it never gets deployed before the actual file set with the application, because I think we have too many APNS requests going on, so that it can take up to 5 or 10 minutes before the profile is installed.
Well, and that's a great point. I just want to mention on the, because it's kind of a hidden thing that you don't think about too much with FileWave. Well, it's not FileWave specific, but all this stuff that we do that's MDM related, whether it's VPP or, you know, if you're installing anything new to a device, or you're enrolling new devices, or you're removing stuff from devices, all of it's driven the same way through an APN push, right? A push notification that goes to Apple, right? And that is a queue, right? So let's assume that you've got 10,000 devices in your environment that are, let's say it's all iOS, and you assign a new app to all macOS or all iOS devices, and you update the model. That's 10,000 APN pushes that go to Apple. Apple's not going to take 10,000 APN pushes from us or anyone in a 5-second period. It's a queue that gets built from there. So there is a queue now of 10,000 APN pushes. And by default, I think it's 200 every 25 seconds is the default out of box. I could be wrong on that, but it's something like that. So what happens is the FileWave server picks up a couple of hundred of those requests at a time and throws them over to Apple, and it completes. And then a couple of hundred more, and then a couple of hundred more. So over time, that whole APN queue gets resolved, right? One of the things that we'll talk about is, at least eventually, having that in our dashboard so we can see that, so that it's actually exposed to you so you can see what that queue looks like. But why that's so meaningful is if you do something like that, you update the model and all those devices get that new app, then you whip out your brand new iPad out of the box that you just had of this new palette of devices that are resolved. One of the things that's required as you're enrolling that device is that it's going to send an APN to actually work with that device. So you may find, has anybody ever been in a situation where you've seen the device say awaiting configuration or something along those lines as you're trying to enroll that new device? That happens when you've got your APN is kind of first in, first out from that. So it's queued and it's waiting to go. Now that's not necessarily a problem. It all depends on what your system's doing at the time. But we're going to talk a little bit later about using dashboard to help us kind of at least police that. But if you ever wonder why it happens sometimes like that and why other times it just blows right through and goes right away, that's why. All right, super. So let me show another thing here or two, and then we can maybe do some more questions and answers and kind of kicking things around. Let's talk, I've got kind of a list here. Let's talk about, this is not actually payload related, but or FileSet related, but Emma thought it was really important when we talked about it yesterday because it kind of slipped through the cracks, especially with 14 being so large with the number of things that it did. You may not know that you can add any field that you want into the client view, right? So if I look, I don't know what I've got in here. I have asset tag in there. Let me see what I've got from a custom field perspective here.
I'll just kind of interrupt you here. John Humphrey had a question that kind of ties into this about being able to search in FileWave based on the asset tag or a custom field. And I was just going to tell you that if you have the view or if you have that column here in your field, you can search for it.
Yeah,
I was going to show you how to do that.
I do. I happen to have asset tag in my view already. Right now, that's only helpful though if I'm looking at clients. So if I come over and look on clients, and I can then search, sort by it, but I can then see those things. So FW-1234, right? I can filter for that too, right? Now I can see it in the tree view as well, but not quite as helpful when I have to go browse to all the different locations to find it. So I like the client view for this, and of course mobile view as well. But what I was going to say is you could put any field in there. So anything that you're wanting to look at. I don't know what others I have for custom fields. They're one of the most likely fields that you would add. But I may do something like maybe I set this could be stuff that I want to police for just really quickly. Asset tag is by far the most popular, but maybe even my local administrators where I've got a script that's dynamic, that's reading from the devices group membership. Maybe I want to include that in this view. So I can customize the columns in this view, and I got this new button in here for adding an inventory field. And I can go through and search for it, which I think it was local, right? And I can pick local administrators and say, okay, and that adds it in there for me. So now my local administrators field is in here. And of course I can drag and drop these fields around, but I'm going to go back to my client view. And that one is only pertinent. In fact, I don't know that I've got it turned on for anything. Or is it? Well, that one I'll have to look at. Let me pick another one that's actually got data in it. Oh wait, it worked. It just took a second to refresh. Right, so we can see that in there. So I could look for anything. Like if I knew, the examples might be, hey, if I knew that somebody was adding a rogue admin account to devices or whatever, I could actually then just filter for that here by adding that field and then quickly looking for site. Right, that's going to give me, oh, here's all the devices that have Keller T80 somewhere. Now, of course, that's filtering across all the fields, right, that are showing, but local administrators being one of them. Right, so it's kind of an under the radar kind of change that was made in version 14. And the other one that I think some folks missed too, not a big deal in my environment because they don't really have that many file sets, or at least I've got them fairly structured in small areas. But the other is the ability now to right click and choose move to for a file set to move set from one place to another quickly without the drag and drop through 27 screens. So any of you that ever had to do that, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you've never had to do that, then you probably don't care about move to. But all right, let's pick one more thing and then we'll go back to questions here. Let's talk about the profile editor just a little bit, just some basic best practice stuff with profiles. So when it comes to things like a restriction profile, let's say I'm doing one for iOS devices or macOS for that matter. Do I want to include or put things together like say an email profile, right, with my restrictions? It's really bad practice to do that, but it's not necessarily obvious that it's best practice not to do that. And the reason why, let's just throw some stuff in here. So I'm just going to give this a title. So we'll go to random profile, right? Why do we say don't put a bunch of mixed stuff together in a profile? So let's go in and add Wi-Fi, and we'll say attach to me, right, as our thing to attach to. So that's configured. And then I come through here, and let's say restrictions is a good example that I go through with restrictions. And I say, hey, they can't use a camera, right? And I put those two things together in that same payload. So if I look at it by only the things that are configured, I've got the Wi-Fi set up and I've got restrictions in place. Anybody want to volunteer why those are bad to intermix? Yeah, I see some answers in there in the chat. The reason you don't want to intermix them is because all of a sudden you've mixed something that you may need to change, right? Like Wi-Fi, you're probably going to globally change that. So that's all good on its own. But as soon as you put it together with something like restrictions, where you have multiple groups of people, and all of a sudden you may find that, well, your restriction for disallowing use of the camera doesn't actually work for your staff members who actually want to use the camera and need to use it in the classroom. Or maybe you have you know, finance people that you absolutely don't want to use the camera, but everybody else can. All of a sudden you've got a mix of things now, and now you've got a problem with this profile because it's assigned to everybody. So how do I edit the one profile that's got all these same restrictions and network in it, right? Also, it's confusing just from a naming perspective. What do I actually call this profile? So best practice is keep it to individual things. And will you end up with multiple profiles that have restrictions? Yes, you will. But the less you put in the profile is generally the better. I normally try to stick to whatever the payload is. Like if it's restrictions, that I'll try as best as possible to only have one that assigns a device instead of multiples, because it can get very confusing how they work between them. But you never want to kind of mix and match like this. All right, so that's one thing. And another thing I'll mention just while we're in here, and it's one of my favorite things of this editor, is simply the search ability within here, because these profiles are just overwhelming, right? When you start coming through here, you're like, man, I don't know where that thing is that I need to do. You can usually find it by keyword. And I usually, when I talk about this, I usually look for wallpaper because it's a good example, right? I can search in here, just keyword search, hit enter, and of course get to the little rainbow wheel for a second, the first time you do search, and then after that, it's fast. But that's going to come back then and give me the different places where that is. So I search for wallpaper. It's showing me that that's in restrictions. It's in command policy, right? Those are the only two. When I look at the individual payloads, though, and I configure them, you see everywhere in here where that keyword is that I look for will be highlighted in red. And the web admin is highlighted in blue, but it's basically the same concept. Right, so you can see those things in here, which makes it really much simpler, especially with restrictions, when you're looking at that to quickly get to the restriction you want within the profile, because this list in and of itself, right, is very long and demanding, right? But we can see with that highlighting that we actually get that right here, and I can say, hey, I don't want them to modify the wallpaper. All right, so just a couple of things around profiles there. So Emma, do we have any good questions or examples or anything anybody wants to talk about from the chat?
Yeah, I earlier in the chat there was a question about what would the impact to remove DEP profiles that are already associated to devices that in production from, like, what would the impact be? And I can answer this one. So DEP profiles, they work as when the device is getting enrolled and it's at that remote management page, that's when it looks at it, and it never looks at it again, unless it's getting re-enrolled and it was erased and brought back in. So if you were to remove profiles in the DEP associations window, devices that were already in production, it's going to have no effect unless that device is getting erased and you need to re-enroll it. So yeah, no effect on the device unless it's being enrolled that second. I just want to answer that one because that's one I get a lot.
Yeah, and in this case, you know, I've got kind of a split here of my DEP profiles that I've used for test purposes and such. So what would it mean if I deleted this test profile that we did earlier today to the device that I was working with? Well, it wouldn't mean anything because this is the device that is actually sitting here on the enrollment page right now. So it's, as Emma said, it's only used exactly at enrollment time. But if I were to turn right around and wipe it again, it's going to have a lot of impact because now it's not going to have anything associated and it doesn't know where to go. So it's just going to start up like a new iPad. Right? One thing that's really important to know is that these profiles, when it comes to the DEP profile, of course, drives telling the iPad or the macOS device where to go for MDM. So in this case, points it right to your FileWave server. Right? That communication for DEP comes from Apple, and that's not necessarily obvious when you're looking at this particular dialog where you're associating that DEP profile. When you do that here, that's actually sent over to Apple, and Apple stores all those rules about this is really just JSON that gets sent over to Apple, stored in their backend, and then when the device comes in, it picks it up, but it picks it up from Apple. It doesn't pick it up from FileWave. It's just that Apple got it from us. So what we're doing when we associate these profiles here is we're really giving them to Apple and saying, hey, Apple, this device, C07T1, blah, 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 is assigned my Apple TV profile. And here's the Apple TV profile. Can you please store it? Right, so if you wanted to, you know, start fresh in here, I think there's some people saying that. What if you wanted to create a new one that just was global? You can absolutely do that. Delete all the ones that you have in there and start fresh and reassign. A couple of things that folks maybe not have picked up on. These assignment rules really make your life easier. If you're not using them, you absolutely should. Has anybody not used them or not know how they work? Right, so if you're managing DEP, right, you can, back in the day, you had to come in and you had to associate these manually. Anybody that's used FileWave for a long time knows that that was really annoying to come in and do that and have to assign these all the time manually. If you've got a simple environment, if you go into apply assignment rules, or sorry, not apply, but edit assignment rules, you'll see in this dialog that you can do rules. These are very much like smart groups, but the easiest thing to do, ignoring rules for a second, is just to set a default DEP profile. That one's really important even if you're not doing anything else. What this means is when you buy anything and it comes into your DEP environment, it's automatically going to get this profile if it doesn't get any others. Right, so even if you want to assign them manually, I think the default one is a good one to start with because it'll make sure that your devices are always managed. If you don't have anything assigned, which is how it happens by default, then you could end up with devices that, you know, actually don't get enrolled in MDM, right? But the rules here allow you to do things like, say, depending on what you want to drive them off of, this one that I've got for a shared iPad says that the custom field for user role is student, right? Then I am assigning this particular profile, which is a rule for shared iPads. Right? If we create a new rule, it starts by saying, okay, which profile do we want to create a rule for? Right? So I could say this test profile, and I could say, okay, what's the rule? Now you'll notice that you don't see all the fields over here on the left. Why do you think that is? Why don't you see all the inventory fields that you get in FileWave? Why is it limited to like DP stuff specifically and custom fields only? Anybody have any idea? Yeah, good answer, Darren. These are the things that we know out of the box from Apple, right? Well, not the custom fields, but DEP account information, and especially DEP device information. But this is the most popular one is operating system. And you'll note it tells you what the attributes are, so you know when you add it. But we can say, hey, if it is iOS, for instance, then it gets this profile, right? So we can do that. Same thing with the DEP account information, and that you may use that, especially if you've got multiple DEP accounts. You can use that to then drive association of devices to particular DEP profiles, depending, and maybe use the naming in there to drive some workflow stuff. But why do you think custom fields are included, right? Because all the DEP device and the DEP account stuff comes in from a DEP sync from Apple, which means that you know this stuff even before you've got the device in hand, right? How does that apply here with custom fields? Is anybody using custom fields much? Especially with, we'll say, placeholders. Exactly. Thanks, PM. For placeholders, right? So if I want to do something particular, like device role, right? Device role might be really important to me from a custom field perspective. And so I might say, hey, if this is in my patch group, the thing that we just talked about before, then I want it to get a totally different set of content and a different DEP profile than, you know, maybe I'll try out my experimental enrollment, but only with this patch testers group and not with everyone. So these rules allow you to programmatically assign these DEP profiles. And to the question about how often they're evaluated, I believe it's on a similar schedule to smart group evaluation. I think it happens at the same time. All right, and so I don't know if there are any other questions on that, or we want to move on to another topic. Have we curated anything good for us, Emma?
I did have something, sorry, I was writing down. Let's see, there's one, will moving file sets out of root into groups and or smart groups break their existing association? And I'm guessing, I can't remember who asked this, but I'm guessing you were talking about individual associations that were just to the device and not the group or the root they were originally in.
So the question is, when you have an association to something.
Yeah, so moving a device out of root, I'm guessing having an association directly to that client and then moving it to another group, would it affect the association? And no, it wouldn't affect the association because the client or the association is still to that individual client, and as long as it's in FileWave and that association is present, no matter where you move it, it's still going to be there.
That's right. And why is that, Emma? What doesn't change that makes that still be the same? This isn't a test, by the way. It's more a rhetorical question than anything else. But the thing that doesn't change, I know Emma knows the answer to this, but I'm not going to put her on the spot, is the ID.
The ID of the client, yeah.
Yeah, the ID, and that goes for the clone too, right? So a clone, if you move a clone from one place to another, if it's one that you can move, and you had something associated directly to that clone, it's no different because the association is to the ID, right? And you'll notice this because if I right click here and I say show associated file sets, you'll notice that what it does in this view, now I don't happen to have anything associated to it, but if you notice what it does in this view is it automatically switches the association view to go to this client group or clone ID, and it automatically puts in the ID number of the object we were just looking at over here in clients. You see that's ID 300. That filter then put that 300 here and made it automatically filter for things that go to that device. So it's filtering by ID because that's also how we assign it. So as long as the ID of the association stuff doesn't change, so when we look at a real one, let's find something that's actually an association, right? What you're going to notice is that this one, where Brave private browser is sent to this iPad, right? The ID of the association is 4508, but there's an ID of the file set and there's an ID of the clone. So in this case, the device is 4275 and the reveal file is ID 4502. If neither of those things change, that association is still good. But if I delete this guy and that ID goes away, or if I delete this guy and that ID goes away, then that's a problem. Right? So the question about when you move it though, if I had something associated here and I move this device ID 300 out to root, yes, then it would absolutely be a problem with the association because it's still associated to ID 228, and now all of a sudden this one is doesn't inherit anymore. So I'm sure that was way too long-winded an answer to that question, but hopefully that's helpful. All right, should I move on to something else on my list, or do we have another good question? And that was a very good question, thank you.
Tony, I'm just chiming in,
Hey,
just looking at the
Pian,
question. Yes.
are you at the
I'm
pub?
back,
Are you at the pub, Pian, or what?
And now, you know, in France we're locked down, so I can't. I could have my beer to join you, but yeah. Just going through the long list of questions. I just picked one where. So, is there a difference between applying associations to a clone or master or clients? Thinking iOS, but also macOS. That's maybe one thing which could be interesting, and that's something we made a little bit more consistent with 14.0 and FileSet revision. When you apply an association, you may have what we call association conflict. If you associate the same file set and same file set revision to the same device, but with different associations. You can do that because you can make an association between the file set group in which this file set is to one of the groups where the device or a clone of this device is. And you may have an association that says, hey, the file set should be installed today. And you may have an association that says, hey, the file set should be installed tomorrow. Or you may have different associations that are conflicting. So how is FileWave taking care of that? When you create the association, we compute what we call the association distance. So if you have a direct association between the file set and the client, the distance is super close to between both. Now, if you make an association to the parent group, you add some distance between the device and what you are associating. And if you have a clone, the clone is less close to the device than the device itself. So we have this rule which makes that if you make an association to something which is top level group, and if you have clones, we increase what we call this distance. So there is no really difference in the sense that if you make an association to the clone or to the master, the device will be there. But if you have multiple associations, one will win, and here you will have the difference. And what we changed with FileWave 14.0 is how we resolve the conflicts. I could probably try to explain you how the rules were set before FileWave 14.0, but we don't have enough time, and it's still a bit blurry because it came from, I think, 20 years of history of FileWave, and each developer added its own rules. So we decided that, yeah, it was too complicated, and we moved forward. So we compute the rule, we compute the distance, and the shortest distance wins. As easy as that. And if you have two associations with the same distance, we pick the most recent one, which is the one that will apply. Whatever you do the association, smart group, not smart group.
Let me ask a related question. It's not, well, it's not exactly directly related, but how does that apply? And obviously this isn't, we don't resolve this, but what happens with two profiles that are conflicting with something in a profile that goes to an endpoint?
So if you have two different profiles, we will send both to the device in the order of the, so we will compute the order in which they should be sent, and then we just let Apple decide. We are a little bit, leaving Apple decide for us, and most of the time the device is taking care of that nicely. Now, if you have conflict, it's really depending on the device. So if you have, we know that sometimes some profiles are really, you cannot send two instances of the same type of profile, and then Apple will just reject the second one. But we are not taking care of that. It's done directly by the device.
Right. And that's not the only, we just had an issue come up this week that just to reiterate for everybody, because it's not necessarily obvious how stuff works behind the scenes. But when you install, let's say, a new app to a device, FileWave doesn't install that app. If it's a VPP request, when we talked about those push notifications before, we're sending a push notification, and the device talks to us and gets the information to install the app. And then it tells us, yeah, we're going to do that. But then from there on, it is the device talking to Apple directly, and we don't play a part in it. Once it's said it's going to do it. And I know there were some questions from a customer this week on that process. PM would like to talk. The floor is yours, PM.
Thank you. A follow-up question on that topic. If you go into App Store on your client and upgrade an app, the system will tell you that the app is open, and you need to confirm that you're going to close it and update it. If you push a VPP update, it will just fail if the app is open. Is there any way to have the macOS understand that the app is going to be updated and notify the user?
As far as I know, there is still no way to do that. Now, Apple is starting to take this kind of request into account. They are making the MDM world a little bit more open than it used to be. For instance, they just added to the restart device command the way around. They added a notification, so you can now define if you restart the hard way, or if you prompt the end user telling, hey, I really would like you to restart. So it's not there yet. I will just double check if it has not been added very recently, but for now it was not the case. But it may be something that will come because they are making progress in that direction. One thing I'm not sure if you have any chance, but there is, maybe we can share that in the conference notes. They have opened the Apple Developer Forum related to mobile device management. I try to go there quite frequently and ask questions and answer questions there. And I see a lot of people are asking things about device management and feature requests as well. So they start to be way more open than they used to be. So not yet, but hopefully that will come soon.
Thanks.
All right, super. So let's switch gears here for a second and go with something that I see quite a lot when I'm trying to help folks when they get into scripting related stuff. So we, of course, don't provide a whole lot of scripts. We give you some kind of starter scripts for some things, but we give you the tool set for deploying them. Two things I want to talk about with scripts, and one is Windows specific and the other is just in general. If we go in and create a new file set, right? So I'm going to go and create just an empty file set here. Don't care what it's called. Right, and in this guy, I'm going to add a script. Right, and let's say this is related to my local administrator's account or local administrator's custom field that I showed you before, where we're reading back what the local administrators are on the device. Let's say it's a Mac OS device or Windows device. Right. The obvious next step from collecting that information is the backdoor account that I put on all the devices might not be there. And I want to do something about it because that I want that account to be there. So I may be tempted to go ahead then and create an activation script. And tempted is the wrong word because I might I very likely want to do this. So we're going to call this like create admin or something like that. And we'll stick with shell for now because I'm going to write just pseudo code anyway. And I don't care about any of this for now. I'm going to leave that in there, but I'm going to put in the code that I'm going to say this is not actual code. I'm just typing it in there. Reset password or add local account DSG administrator with password as password. So this kind of pseudo code, right? Where I'm going to set a script and send creation of an account, and I'm going to put the password in the script. What's the problem with doing that? Anybody guess what my risk factor is here? If we look at this file set, yeah, absolutely. Security, all right? The password is in plain text in that script file, exactly so. So when you do a script, it's not magic, all right? If I go in and look at the file set in this case, on the Mac, it automatically puts it here in var scripts, and the Windows side, it puts it in program data. But it's a file, like every other file set. It's a file or files that are going to the endpoint. So that file is going to be created in this location, var scripts 8782. So let's assume that you have an issue where you've done this. If you've got an enterprising student or employee that's looking to cause problems, and they happen to stumble across this, the only security that you have is security by obscurity here, that it's in a weird location. But if anybody finds it, right, they're not only know that you're, of course, managing this stuff, because that's there anyway, but they can also read that password in plain text. So there is another way to do this instead, so you don't have to put it directly in the script. And so I would like to show that. And that's, again, this, remember earlier we used launch arguments when it came to doing what was the example we did before? When we installed Firefox, we used a launch argument. Well, I can do the same thing in shell scripts and in PowerShell, for instance. I can put my password here. Then it is not in the file, right? It's just passed by the FileWave client. It's not in the script itself. And in the script itself, that can simply be leveraged if we go ahead and apply that change. And on the shell side, I think it's $1. I always confuse it, but I think it's $. Right? It's the argument. Good. What's that?
It's $1. Yeah, correct.
Yeah, yeah. So on the shell side, it's $1. I think on the PowerShell side, it is %1. But same thing goes for all of it. This will just dynamically read the value from the launch argument so that you can hide that information, right? So it doesn't have to be exposed, right? And that can be really useful in lots of ways, not just for security, but actually just for making maybe a script that you don't have to edit the script much, right? So you could change this and make two things, right? So let's say, you could do $2 in here as well. And not only could you have the password, but also the account as well, right? And you do that simply by editing that, and then we can change the launch arguments on that too. So if we go back to get info, we can just add another one, right? And, did I not apply that? I thought I did. I must not have applied that, but anyway, the two launch arguments could then be password, and then we could call this, user account or whatever. In my case, it was, I think, DSG administrator. Right, so just for safety's sake, if you're doing this kind of thing when there's something sensitive that's in the file set, you can do it this way. You can also pass things over, and this is really brilliant, from any custom field. So where you see here, it says to use % field name, you can pass those in here too. And that's used by our imaging file sets. If you've ever noticed that, you'll note, do I have that here? I think I do. I don't remember what I called it though. I might not have that here, but we use that in the macOS upgrade file set that we give you the recipe for. You'll notice that it does a %, I think it's %UDID or %, I think it's device_ID actually, gets passed to a shell script that makes an API call to come back to the FileWave server to make a change for that particular client. So you can dynamically read those things too. Now that's going kind of into the weeds, but it's a really good ability within scripts there to be able to pass those. And you can also pass those attributes in profiles too. So if you're setting things like you know, screen prompts and things, you can reference dynamic content. All right. Any new questions or anything for us there, Emma?
I've been answering what I can. Let's see.
Wait, there was a second thing I was going to cover. I said I was going to do two things. What was the other thing? Launch arguments. Oh, I was going to mention, I think, as well, and I'm sure a lot of you do this already, but let's find something that's a package. Yep, not that way anyway. Do I have anything that's a package? Well, I don't really, but let's cheat and pretend that something's a package here. So I've got this update. If I look at this, let's assume that this is a PKG. How does a PKG work? Does anybody know how they actually install? What FileWave does with them? I mean, basically, we don't do anything with them. We throw the PKG down to the device and we say, hey, device, open this PKG, right? And it installs it. Okay, that's exactly right. So that's perfect answer. That's exactly what we do. We put it on the local file system, and wherever we say it's going to go. So if we look at this one's a little different, but sorry, I can't look at that one. Let me look at something different. If we look at what's a good one? We've got lots of things. Well, I've got nothing in here. That's the side effect of rolling your server back a lot. Okay, this one I think has some content. I think this is a driver for, let's just open it over here, right? So that puts files in this location, right? So let's pretend for a second that this is a PKG, and it's throwing the PKG in this really, you know, down level location, right? What happens after it installs? Let's say I take the association away. What happens with the PKG after I take the association away? Does the app that got installed go away? It doesn't, because the thing that we're deploying is the installer, not the actual application. So the app stays, even though the installer is the thing that we deployed. But the installer doesn't necessarily go away. And in this case, right, when I'm looking at this one said it's self-healing. So if I were to take the association away, then it's going to take these files away. But that's not always the case when it comes to an application, right? If this is a PKG and I had this set as ignore at verify, it's actually going to be left behind, right? Which means the files are going to be left behind. And normally when I set it that way, I want it that way on purpose. But something like a PKG, or in that, for that matter, an MSI, I think I probably have an MSI in here somewhere. Oh, boy, the cupboard's bare on examples. But if I've got a file that is used to install something else, sometimes I might actually want to do a cleanup to remove that thing if it's not self-healing. Or with a PKG, I might have it self-healing and it removes the PKG, but I might want to write a script to actually remove the application too, like if it's really important for you to remove it. And that's where, when we go back to scripts, where the pre and post uninstallation scripts are really good scripts to have, because this is where you can do in your pre and post your uninstallation of files, right? So let's say that the removal of something removes the installer but doesn't remove the app. Maybe you want to do the removal too, right? So you can script those things as well. And usually you've got a good one. Once you've done one, you've got a good one as a template for doing other things as well. All right. Is there anything else coming out of the group? Because we're about out of time here, and I would like to honor the break, mostly because I need a break myself, and I'm selfish to the core. So we're going to come back here at the top of the hour, and we're going to talk some dashboard-related stuff. But again, the topic's open like it was in this one. So if we find that we go in other directions, that's perfectly fine too. But any last parting questions or anything? There's a question about, yes, the dashboard is in the web one, but do we have the capability of having a file set install automatically, then revert to a kiosk association without having to make API calls to change smart groups? Well, there's no conversion. That breaks 15 minutes. Let me think about that, Stanley, and let me, I'll probably reach out to you on that one offline because I'd like to understand how you're doing it, but we could probably do some things. But yeah, we might be able to do something where we're using software inventory, which we haven't talked much on. But let's go ahead and take a break and we'll come back here at the top of the hour. All right, thanks everyone.